Make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniak and the podcast in the description below. I've been really wanting to share this story for some time now, but haven't found a good outlet until coming across here. About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our two closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and really beautiful. The beauty of it and creepiness of it is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, but never felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there's always people around, especially in the summer. The first day was awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remembered having a great time there. The campsites are fairly close together, and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I thought we were all getting pretty pumped up about the site, as there were no neighbours around the sites, just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This isn't common, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally. We had breakfast and then head to the lake for a couple hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground. We ended up getting back at around 2ish, and we noticed that the site next over to us had a silver rented car parked on it. We didn't think much of it, and went about a fire. At some point, we noticed the occupants of the site next to us. It's a pretty average looking white dude, maybe early 40s. He was so average looking that it's hard to even picture him. We all immediately caught on to the fact that he was constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath saying, "You notice that guy keeps looking here." I remembered feeling uncomfortable as we're all in our bathing suits from the lake. But I make a conscious effort just to ignore it. It's worth mentioning that we're a little buzzed/drunk, not out of control, just feeling good. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice the guy constantly staring at us. In hindsight, Dave or I should have called him out. The story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to the trip and really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off my relaxed vibes. The alcohol coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him led to us not confronting it. I just thought he was a lonely dude. Aside from the start, there were a couple of mildly weird incidents that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that at some point, he left his site to go and do whatever. When he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s, about our age, walked by it and snapped a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything. She smiled and awkwardly kept going. Dave and I both thought it's odd, but we're preoccupied with beer. Later in the evening, around 7ish, the camp host was doing her round checks on people. She kept checking us in and moved on to him. I remembered all of us eavesdropping intently to what they're saying. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like. He kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't know there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was. But he had 100 different questions about it. Where is it? When's it open? Is it private? Which are not weird, but in context, definitely odd. The sun started to go down. We're all drunk, so weren't too concerned with the creepy dude anymore. At one point, we went for a walk and I noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. Now, I would call out this kind of behaviour, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all continued to laugh and talk about how creepy he was. Now we have a good time and keep drinking. At one point, the guy started eating beans aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern, no fire. He looked at us while doing so, and Dave and I noticed this and kind of snicker at each other about how weird it is. Eventually, compose yourself. Eventually we decided to go to bed. I think the guy had left his site at this point. I remember joking, saying, "I better not wake up to that guy looking in our window." My wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck. I remembered feeling creeped out as I fell asleep, but shrugged it off. Around 2 a.m, both my wife and I were jolted awake by what we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if each other heard that. We come to the conclusion that it was probably somebody trying to be loud, and decided to go back to sleep. As I was trying to sleep, I start feeling very unsettled. I decided to get out of the car and take a look around. I checked my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze and then heard it again. I eventually realised that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered, "What?" And I heard Dave say, "Can you hear that? Start your car." I instantly realised that something is wrong, so rather than ask questions, I climbed back into my car and started it right away. Dave and Sarah busted out of the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car. They tell me drive. They were too freaked out to even explain anything. Eventually I pulled over, figuring we're far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. Now finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what happened. As she put it, she was woken by a light coming from a creepy dude's campsite. Apparently, he had lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, naked, staring in our direction. It gets weirder. At some point, he turns off the lights and tries to signal across to us. I'm talking like Morse code or something. Across the ravine, an old RV begins using its headlights to signal back. Dave is awake now. I questioned them on this detail, and they're both very clear they were communicating. Keep in mind, it's absolutely pitch black out. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. This is what caused Sarah to scream, hence waking me up. At this point, I decided we need to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was about an hour and a half up an old camp service road that was already very remote. So leaving at night wasn't an option. We decided the best course of action was to alert the camp host. We drove around and eventually found the trailer she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was responsive. She mentioned that the guy was really weird when she even checked him in, and she called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently, there was a massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police can't even send anyone until sunrise. The camp host said there wasn't really anything she could do beyond that. It really sucked to hear that. Now, I don't know what we can do, not to mention there's still that guy in the RV. One more thing really weird happened. At around 4 a.m, we're all sitting in my car when a man in a hood walked right up to the window, and the second I noticed him, I turned on my engine and headlights. I'm not kidding you, he bolted off into the trees. We all sat in my car until sunrise, once the light was out. We went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was there with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt gross and we wanted to get out of there, so quickly leave. After a couple of hours we left, I get a call from the police. They said they went out to the campsite and questioned the guy. He said he was simply showering. The cop told me there was nothing he could do. It was our words against his. He questioned the RV people. They said they didn't know anything, but he mentioned a quote, "A very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." The whole experience with the police is frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said there wasn't anything they could do unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate. So there's my story. I learnt a lesson about being polite when somebody's making you feel uncomfortable. Nowadays, I'm much more aggressive with crazy people. I also know it's not easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally naked near us. I don't know. I wish I had more courage, but honestly, it's really scary in the moment and you have no idea what their potential is. I'm okay admitting that. Clearly we were dealing with a very messed up person who had accomplices. I can only imagine their end goal. I hate to think of it. I just wish the police could have acted better. This happened in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, out hunting deer with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. Now, I do remember this day like it was yesterday. My dad and I had a few different stands over in an area of maybe about 3/4 square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was 5, up until I was about 12, which is the legal age to hunt with a rifle. This particular morning, we walked to my first stand. It's about 5 in the morning, so pretty dark out. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always eerie. Now not long after they left, I see a flashlight off in the direction that they left. It's always eerie in these situations. It's roughly 200 yards away now, moving in my direction. I figure they forgot something from the truck or I don't know, so I decide to radio to see what they're doing. We're sitting in the stand. Frank's about to head to another one. He says, obviously this flashlight is somebody else. Now this isn't super uncommon, and isn't really a big deal. The woods get crowded sometimes, and there is a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other person knows I'm here. I ended up dozing off though, as it's pretty dark out. Now when I wake up, the sun's up. It's around 8 AM, and I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's heard or seen anything moving. Nothing yet. There's a couple of gunshots off in the distance. I get up, go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving again. Then, not far away, maybe 30 yards out, I decide to return. When I come back to my sound, I sit down and take a real good look around. I have the feeling that I'm being watched, but nothing's going on. I finally look out to my left when I saw a big flashlight and something orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during the gun season. I radio to my dad and Frank to see if either one of them are here. My dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank, and decide to grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. This is not Frank, and this guy is looking at me through his scope. Rifle aimed directly at me, which is a massive no-no. You never point your rifle at anyone, under any circumstances. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens, which is why normal people like us use binoculars. At first I'm like, what an idiot. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't point the gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking that he might shoot me. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, and stay behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand is on this kind of little knot. It's on the side of a much larger hill. I radio to my dad and tell him what's up. He says sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I can't do that and keep looking. Every time I look, he's aiming at me. He's always in different spots, still moving to my direction. I go back to look again, and he would be 30 yards away from the last time. A good 10 minutes of this happen, and my dad radios to me, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he's obviously trying to keep me calm at the thought that something serious might happen. He's still there but keeps moving. I don't know his problem. My dad tells me just keep hidden, he'll figure it out. That he'll be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear the shot. I lose my mind trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot this guy? What's going on? I sit there for maybe 3 minutes. Feels like hours, and I hear, "Alright, coming out and head towards my stand." I peek over and I see my dad waving from alongside the ridge that the guy's been on. It turns out, Frank had been really restless and took a stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that the stranger's on, not knowing he's there. He knocked his radio batteries loose and couldn't communicate with us. Turned out the shot was actually Frank shooting a deer. My dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off from towards us, then to the logging road out of sight. I was driving late at night on the I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula, MT. I'm originally from Seattle, and I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along either side. It's occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm on my way to my hotel in Missoula when I notice that I need some gas. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump. It had a convenience store attached to it, but it was closed. I get this really weird vibe from the station as soon as I pull up to the pump. I hadn't turned off my car yet. I just put it in park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut off my car when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark figure come from the side of the closed convenience store, literally running at my car. Some instinct actually kicks in, and I pull my car back into drive and get the hell out of there. I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing after my car for a few seconds, but by that time, I make that turn and get back onto the freeway. I literally can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed for the rest of my drive either. Now this happened in 2009, so while smartphones did exist, they weren't as prevalent or as good as they are today. Even with my flip phone that I have at the time, I can't even get signal on it. Secondly, the events at the gas station happened in a span of about 20 seconds. Yeah, really quick. I arrive, park, turn off the car, see the dark figure running towards my car, and I put my car back into drive, burn rubber to get out of there, and I see the dark figure chasing after my car, tearing up on the freeway. And finally, someone mentioned the story of the Wendigo, and I've heard about it, but I wasn't isolated up in the mountains, and this was less than 30 seconds away from the freeway, so I don't really think it was that. I think the dark figure was a desperate meth head looking to rob someone or hurt someone. After you've driven hundreds of miles, your brain doesn't really think straight, but I don't know what it could have been. All I know is that it terrified me, and I still think about it to this day. I was walking on a trail in the Crater Lake to get back to my car, and as I'm doing so, I hear somebody running behind me. I look, and it's an older man by himself. I quicken my pace as the sun is setting, and it would soon be dark. He stops running, and starts up again, getting closer, and I do the same, trying to keep distance. It felt creepy, and I was so thankful when I saw another woman with a big dog not too far in front of me. I met up with her, and eventually, so did the guy. We all walked together now, and this man is very strange and socially awkward. He had a camera. I'm certain the woman and I had the same creepy feeling from the exchanges we'd given each other. She said if he came here alone, and he replies that his family's already down the hill waiting for him. I immediately felt very ill when I heard this. And then, the really weird thing happened. He took at least 3 pictures of the woman and I. I could have asked him to delete them, but honestly, he probably never would have done so, and I just wanted to get back to my car because he's making me feel very uncomfortable. We finally reached the bottom of the hill, and I noticed that there's no family in sight for him. He gets in his car alone and drives off. I felt very lucky there was another person there with me. I'm sure he was some kind of predator. So I went on a backcamping trip in some youth program in North Cascades near Seattle. One of us got hurt from falling on a rock on our way to the base camp, so I had to help carry him back to the trailhead while being accompanied by one of the leaders. On the way back, we came across another young hiker, a woman. We talked as we're kind of taking a rest. She said she was going to summit one of the peaks on the trail later. The problem is, that's about 8 hours away, and she only has a light backpack. Now the next day, back at base camp, helicopters swarmed, and men were dropping. It was like a movie. I was taken back. Little did I know, there was a huge search and rescue looking for the same woman I interacted with just hours before. For 3 days every night, all I would hear was the distant calls of men yelling out her name, echoing off the basin walls in an endless search. I remembered hearing it was supposed to be a suicide, that she was a seasoned hiker, yet she didn't pack properly enough. It didn't make sense. Perhaps she just wanted to go a little bit further than stay. I remembered after I flew home I would never stop thinking of her, and I never stopped. I still look her up, just to see that she is never found, that she's not with her family, and I hate that. You just have to be really careful when you're hiking. This was a few years ago in October, actually around the time the nationwide clown stuff was happening. It's hunting season, and I'm driving to a town north of where I live to meet my dad and ride with him in his truck. It's about 4 AM. Now when I pull off the freeway, I'm waiting for the light to turn green when I see a dude cross the road. Totally normal. I pull away and turn into the parking lot for the usual meeting spot, a park and ride situation. I turn off my car and wait for my dad. I took off towards the main road, and that's when I see a young guy walking towards my car. It's October and really cold, so I can't even see out the windows well. He just continues walking right up next to me until he's about 15 feet away from my car. He just stood there maybe for 10 minutes motionless, just staring at me. I wasn't even too spooked. Like I said, it was hunting season, so I can defend myself, but after 10 minutes, he turns around and walks away, literally never to be seen again. To this day, I still have no idea who he was or what he wanted from me. I've spent my entire life in the woods, taking regular hikes up to 20 miles on the weekends deep into canyons and headwaters of the pond, often in the dark fishing for steelhead. I also used to work building logging roads deep in the forest alone. I've seen lots of animals: cougars, bobcats, wolves, turkeys, bears. I've never been frightened, scared, or come across something I couldn't explain. My grandfather-in-law is an avid hunter. He spent his entire life doing it and told me a few stories. During one trip while hiking in a draw on Washington, somebody shot at him from the ridge. The shot put a hole in the stock of his rifle. He yelled and the guy took off, and he never caught up with him. I wonder if there's a guy out there somewhere wondering if he killed a guy. He also said to me one time, way out on a mouth-long hunt, he came across a wind chime about 100 feet off a tree. It was late fall, so all the leaves were gone, and he could clearly see it and hear it. He has no idea how it got up there. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms further north, we travelled straight west instead of from northwest at first, and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we're far enough north, we turned west onto I-90. At that point, it's been over an hour since we saw anyone, and we really needed a public restroom. We're on the state route, so there's no rest areas. Those of you who have travelled with a young child know that they have a bladder limit, and our daughter won't stop begging to pee. SD was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reach a desperately needed rest stop, as my at the time 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pull in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think too much of it at first, until I started to open my door. My head was turning to the right when the truck had parked a couple of spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy with scraggly brown hair and dark eyes. I could see he was wearing a dingy/dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband I didn't want to go to the rest stop alone because the guy's giving me really weird vibes. He thought I was being a little silly but agreed to come with us. Now by this point, the next stop is Wall, SD, about 100 miles away, according to the huge billboards that we'd passed advertising, so he figured he'd better empty his bladder even though he didn't feel like he needed to. I grabbed our daughter and we headed back inside, followed by the guy who had finished rummaging around his truck but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and head back to the lobby. As I expected, now my husband's already waiting out there. Now, the old guy was also in the lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushes us back to our car. As we're buckling in, he locks the doors and told me that the guy hasn't even went to the restroom. Instead, he was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might need to just get out of here and it was probably a close call. However, the story didn't end there. Remember how I mentioned Wall and it's about 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turn-offs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the whole episode is actually behind us. Except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some snacks. When we get there, we see the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us, same clothes, everything. He starts staring at us and we pay for our snacks and immediately get out of there. I can't believe the fact that he followed us for over 100 miles. Thankfully, after speeding out of there, we never saw him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely. I grew up poor in the mountains of southwest Virginia. We didn't really have internet. It wasn't available. We lived in rural, isolated locations, so no kid would actually go out to play with us. As a teen, I would spend most of my time hunting or riding my bike a few miles to the river to go fishing. I was a stereotypical country boy. I was and am completely comfortable at home in the woods by myself, even at night. We had hounds and I took them out alone at night to go hunt raccoons. I went to our hunting grounds and turned them loose, same as I've done lots of times before. I sat down and waited for them. We didn't have the best dogs. They were young and not trained yet. They wouldn't normally find raccoons and would try and go for a deer or a rabbit. After a few minutes, they hadn't opened, and that was very odd. I started to walk and call out for them, but I don't get a response. So this is odd. I kept walking and come out into the brush and into a cow field so I can walk easier and go call them in the next holler over. Now, a holler is a small valley in between the ridge lanes. As I come out into the cow field, I notice the entire ride line is glowing red. It was the first time that the farmer was clearing brush, and so he has a bonfire burning. I went to check it out and make sure it wasn't starting a forest fire. As I got closer to the top of the ridge, I noticed the glow was solid and not flickering like flames should. There was no smoke that I could smell. I noticed the sheer amount of light, and most of what I thought was colour is actually vibrant red. The only way I can describe it is a stoplight on a dark street that's casting a glow on everything, changing its colour to roughly that. I froze. This isn't coming off as something natural. Where I am is miles off the beaten path with definitely no electricity. It would have been possible for a lifted 4x4 truck or tractor to get there, but no way would it make this much light without a lot of vehicles lined up with their parking brakes on. I had a 20 gauge single shotgun loaded with me. It happened to have a few shells of a buckshot and some slugs in my backpack. I quickly loaded a slug and held a few shells in my hand, ready for follow-up shots, prepared to defend my life. I was terrified. I snuck home as quickly as possible without using my flashlight. I told my mum and stepdad what happened, but they brush it off, and I'm scolded for leaving the dogs in the wood. I guess they thought I was just lazy and didn't want to go after them. The next day, I went back and looked for any signs of what I might have seen. Now, there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. No burnt areas, no tire tracks, nothing. After a few days, I woke up and went into the living room. My stepdad was waiting for me. He jumped up and said he'd seen that light also. He'd been hunting in another location in the opposite direction, still within walking distance. He was waiting for the dogs with his light off when 3 bright flashes illuminate around him and make things glow red. He said it was bright enough that he could have read a newspaper at night. I thought it was so crazy for him to experience it too. We never had another encounter with the red light. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying it was aliens, possibly military or something, but I literally have no idea what this thing was. I visited Arizona in March of 2018 during my school's spring break. I'd already done the get drunk on the beach thing, so I figured I'd do something different. My uncle, aunt and first cousin lived in Flagstaff and they let me stay there for free, so it was perfect. What happened isn't exactly terrifying, but more unnerving. The first thing I noticed about northern Arizona was that it had a very different vibe than my home state of Pennsylvania. I never fully felt at ease the whole time I was there. Right off the bat, my uncle told me a few stories about people dying in strange ways and going missing unexplainably. Now, around 2 days into the trip, my uncle and I spent a long day exploring several interesting sites. We went to Walnut Canyon, where there are some cliff dwellings, and then to an extinct volcano called Sunset Crater, where NASA actually rehearsed the moon landings. When we're hiking up an escarpment of several hundreds of feet in lightly wooded terrain, the whole time I'm looking down at my boots because it's kind of steep and I don't want to make a wrong step. At one point, I looked up and directly in front of me is a girl in her mid-20s and a man the same age ahead of her. It was strange because even though there were trees, it was pretty wide open to the summit, and We should have seen them at some point, so this doesn't make sense. We made it to the top where there was a wide open vista, and we stopped to take pictures. The couple did too, and we struck off a conversation. It turned out they're from France and were on a PAC marriage, a type of civil marriage that's their new thing there. I was kind of geeked because I'd been to France and loved the people, so I tried some of my rusty French lingo. The girl giggled and answered back politely. I thought they seemed nice. My uncle started trash talking them to their face when he realizes that they weren't married in a church, which appalled and embarrassed me. They kind of backed off and continued taking pictures. At one moment, I looked back at the couple, and when I did, it seemed as though they froze in time. I don't know for how long. The couple was standing side by side. Now, it looked as though they were barely making contact with each other. I snapped out of it and looked away, and my uncle started making his way back towards the trail, so we hiked down and left without seeing them again. 2 days later, my uncle and I went and spent the day hiking along the rim of the Grand Canyon. At one point, a family came down the trail from ahead of us and stopped and talked to us for a minute or two. We parted ways. They went behind us. About 2 miles down the trail, the same exact couple came from just where they were before. The trail wasn't a loop. It was a straight shot along the rim, one way up and down. My uncle this time was kind of confused and confrontational, like, how was a French couple in the exact same kind of area even further up? I said if he thought it was weird, and he grunted and we continued in silence. Evening came, and we retraced our steps and almost made it back to the truck. We made one last stop at an observation deck to take in the sunset. We spent about 15 minutes there, and it was packed with people, but there was sort of a relevant hush in the air because of the beauty of the moment. I got separated from my uncle in the crowd, but it was quiet enough that I could hear my uncle loudly exclaiming and sort of jeering at someone. I followed his voice. I found it is the same French couple we'd met a couple of days earlier. I already learned that 5 million people visit the Grand Canyon, so I'm shocked now and don't say anything at all. I remember my uncle going off about their marriage again and said something like, "Go ahead and seal the deal, mate." He grabbed me and left. On the way back to the car, he said, "I have a feeling we're going to see them again." I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. We must have been about 90 miles ahead when we saw them again. Now my cousin worked in the EMS, so I didn't really get to see him for the first few days. He took me on a backcountry trip through the Navajo reservation to obscure places that I'd never been before. He's pretty adventurous. It was myself, my cousin, and a friend he had met when he was working as a guide on rafting trips through the Grand Canyon. She gave me a really bad vibe the moment I met her. She was 31, while both my cousin and I are only 22. I don't know, she was very mummy-like. We went to a bunch of different Navajo sites, and the last stop on the first day was Monument Valley. We drive up the road and set up a camp there. My cousin mentioned skinwalkers, but didn't have any specific stories. He also said that he heard from a veteran emergency responder that they got a missing person report and followed footsteps into the desert with dogs on the scent trail, but the footsteps actually stopped in the middle of the desert without a trace or explanation, and the dogs went crazy when they reached a dead end. My cousin had the first 2-hand experiences when he first started EMS. He got called to a car accident in a valley leading to Sedona. The car was badly mangled. They couldn't even find a body. They end up searching the woods, and about 50 feet into the tree line, there's a man sitting against a tree, wide eyes, no visible injuries from the wreck. He said he never heard what the cause of death was. The last story was from a search for a missing person at the Grand Canyon. He was some sort of professor or geologist type researcher, and was midway down the canyon with another individual. They split up, and the professor guy said he'd meet his friend on the other side of a butte, which is a large rock overcut. The friend took a low path, and the professor cut right across. They should have met up a couple of minutes later, but the professor vanishes without a trace. My cousin said they searched for him for weeks with helicopters but never found him. If anyone's heard this story, let me know. We walked for a long while, and there were more stories that I can't fully remember. We were camped along the base of a small rock outcrop. I've been facing towards the rocks most of the night, but before we turned in, I looked out into the desert before any darkness fell. I saw that it was as flat and as far as the eye can see. You could see for miles without obstruction. I live near a city, and at home on overcast nights, the lights from the city bounced off the clouds, giving a soft white glow. That night in the desert, I saw the same glow as if from a city off towards the horizon, lighting up from one end to the other. I asked my cousin, is there a city? And he said it's probably Vegas, but we're facing north in Utah, so it definitely isn't Vegas. I scanned 360 degrees around and it's pitch black. I finally get into the tent to try and sleep. I've never been in the desert before, so I don't know the atmosphere and what it's supposed to be like. I've read a bunch of posts about an extreme hushed silence and stillness, but I've heard about rooms built in a vacuum, devoid of any sound, and apparently the silence is painful. That's the closest to that I've ever experienced at night. There was no wind or atmospheric pressure, and I could hear my own blood pulsating in my ears and my heartbeat. The silence was painful. When I finally managed to get some sleep, I have a nightmare about a corpse being buried next to me. The next day was fine for the most part, but as soon as the night fell, I developed an excruciating headache that radiated throughout my entire body and made me feel sick to the gut. I figure it's dehydration. Even though I'd been drinking water throughout the day, I gulped down 2 lots of water and took a handful of Tylenol, but to no effect. We dropped off my cousin's friend and stopped for some food. At the time I was still a member of the Catholic Church and went to a Catholic university. My family I was staying with and some of the others we met, they would tell me I'm very Catholic and it's weird I'm out in the middle of nowhere. It seemed weird. Now, for some strange reason, my cousin took me to the empty parking lot of a Catholic church so we could order some food. It was here that he told me he felt like it was humanity's destiny to kill and make war in an endless cycle, and that he wants to join the military for that purpose. On the other hand, I'm a humanity-loving, peacenik sort of dude, so this scares the life out of me. My headache got worse, and I think I was picking up on some serious negative vibes. I couldn't eat any food and save it for the next day. Nothing else strange happened, but it was more the accumulation of things that really freaked me out on this trip. Now, as some updates, it seemed like the 2 days we spent out on the Navajo reservation, my cousin and his best friend were trying to squeeze out every last piece of sightseeing they could on the trip, and not for my sake either, but their own curiosity. It was exhausting, and I wonder if they could tell how tired I was. I have no idea what the place is called, but it's near Tuba City, Arizona apparently. It's a pretty interesting place, and it's in the absolute godforsaken middle of nowhere. Growing up, I always went to my grandma's house. My childhood had a parent with substance issues, and going to my grandma's house was the best. I had friends there, and she lived in a really nice suburb with tons of other kids my age. I made really good friends with a neighbour who had woods in his backyard. Let's call him Mike for the sake of the story. We'd often take little lunches packed by my grandma and go out into the woods and eat them, admiring the creeks and birds, collect pebbles and stuff. You know, kid stuff. This was harmless, and you could usually always see the backs of the houses when you went into the woods. I remembered one day, we made a pack. Mine was in a grocery bag and planned to venture out further than before. You know, you have limitless energy when you're young, and low pain hasn't set in yet from sitting at a desk for ages. I mean, you could literally walk for hours, and probably miles, and not even notice it. So we walk even further than ever. Now we slide down a hill. I remembered being really scared of this, and hilariously, I'm still majorly scared of falling when hiking. But anyway, I got a little scuffed up, but nothing major. Mike was slightly older than me, so I wanted to seem tough and just walk it off. We go deep into the woods, and I remembered being just slightly creeped out, but not enough to protest. I want to explore, too. This hasn't changed. This is in Western PA, I should add. We weren't in the rural areas of my state, but some of the suburbs do intersect with trails and nature preserves which can go on for acres and acres. We came upon a tent in the middle of frickin' nowhere, and I remembered being terrified. My grandma gave me a lot of freedom because I was responsible. This was in the 90s. Aside from needing to be home before the streetlights every night, stranger danger was something she drilled into my head. This set off the internal stranger danger alarm loudly, but I was too afraid to leave Mike's side. So we approached the tent, even though everything inside of me is telling me to get out of there. Mike goes up to it, and tentatively I follow him. At first, I thought somebody was camping, but it still looks more permanent than that. Anyway, there's a fire outside and smoke burning, but it's been doused. There were bones everywhere, skulls mostly, tiny ones, which, to my unattained eye, look like animal bones. There are also little pelts of animals covered everywhere in what appears to be paint and symbols. My adrenaline kicks in and I ran, Mike also. We ran so far and so fast that we fell down the side of the hill and ended up emerging from the woods on the other side of a shooting range. The men firing were screaming at us to leave. I was so scared of the tent that I didn't process the real danger which was at the shooting range. We definitely could have died very tragically because of that. So looking back on this memory, I was wondering, what the hell is this guy doing? There were literally bones everywhere and symbols. Now I dog sit for a family friend. They prefer to have somebody stay at the house with the dogs. I grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere and love the countryside. So for me, this is like a staycation, because I live in the city now and never have time to myself. Anyway, their house is out in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I really mean literally it takes 2 hours to get from work to this place. There is one neighbour within 5 miles and he lives directly across the street. I'm used to this where I'm from. It's supposed to give you the space you need, but also help keep you safer, knowing that you actually have somebody nearby. However, this guy has done nothing but make me feel unsafe as hell. So anyway, eventually I make it to Terry and Johnny's house, and they're telling me the drill, when to feed the dogs, which are 2 super cute and spoiled Australian cattle dogs, watering the plants, etc. Then, as they're loading up their stuff to take it to the car, Terry says, "Oh, don't forget to tell her about Steve." Johnny says, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about the neighbour across the street. He's harmless. He drinks a lot, but he's harmless. Hell, the guy lost his license so many times, all he can do is go up and down on a moped. However, just in case, this is where we keep the gun. Steve has 3 "Don't Tread on Me" Confederate flags, 2 plain Confederate flags which are all hanging from his porch. Of course he's weird. He then takes me to his gun and explains that it's loaded if I want to use it, so I don't even need to cock it, just pull the trigger extra hard. At this point I'm like, whatever. You keep a gun in your house when it takes at least 45 minutes for the police to show up, so I get it. Still, I've got no worries. I'm used to drunken weirdos. I know how to handle them. I love this life in the middle of nowhere, and I've got 2 protective dogs that will attack on command, so I feel pretty safe. Terry and Johnny leave around 3 PM. I took the dogs for a walk and play some frisbee and begin to unload my stuff while they're still worn out from running. As I come back out for my second load of stuff, I hear the neighbour, Steve, slam his door, seemingly having a phone conversation. I hear him go, "Where the hell did you go?" The dogs are hearing him now and growling. I tell them to stay calm. I then hear him say, "I don't care about my kids, screw you." And then he throws something on the unpaved road behind me. Turns out it's his cell phone. As I'm grabbing my stuff, the dogs start going crazy and run a few feet behind me, barking viciously. I drop my stuff and turn around to see the neighbour at the end of the driveway, 75 or 50 feet away, just staring at me. I tell the dogs to calm down and to get back on my side, and they do. I then give Steve a friendly wave, thinking this is weird. He then takes a step forward and says, "You alright?" in a manipulative voice. Steve is wearing dirty jeans, work boots, dirty red hoodie, and a red hat with Confederate flags on it. He also got brown dirty hair down to his shoulders and a beard that's probably 5 inches long. "Yeah, I'm okay," and I say my name. I'm just here sitting Johnny and Terry's dogs for the week. I look down at the dogs to see their reaction. They look as though they're about to attack him in a way I've never seen before. "How are you?" I ask him. "I'm Steve. Thanks for being a good neighbour and checking me." "I'm good. You okay?" And silence again. Now this silence lasts for probably a whole minute, and I figure, he's wasted. I need to get inside. So I turn around and finish grabbing my stuff. As I do so, I hear him take one more step on the gravel driveway and the dogs bark again. And Steve says, "I know them. They're not gonna hurt me. They're good dogs for sure. They won't hurt me." I begin feeling very uneasy, so I close my trunk and turn around to see if he's going to say anything else. I was about to tell him that I was going inside, and then, instead, awkwardly he says, "Yeah, yeah, what?" and yelled. I'm shocked and he says, "Yeah. I'm going inside now. Have a good night." I turn around and the dogs follow me. Steve instead continues to stand where I left him for literally 15 minutes later. Now this house doesn't have a front door. There's a side door at the back. The back door is the main door because the front of the house has these big green privacy trees, so I can't even see him through the front window. You can't see either doors from the street. You have to come onto the property to see them. It's about 6 o'clock, and where I'm at, the sun starts going down around then, but doesn't usually get dark until 9:15 during the summer. Anyway, the dogs and I are on the couch, and I have my headphones on and I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 online. All of a sudden, the dogs flip out, running towards the back door, barking and growling. I'm like, what the hell? They don't usually do that unless somebody pulls in their car and they don't know who it is. I'm not having anyone over, so I grab my knife, which is close by, and start walking towards the back door. The dogs are still going crazy and I have no idea what they're looking at. I don't see anything, but then I look closer. I see mock tail lights in the driveway seemingly hiding behind my car. I then try and focus in and see that Steve is turned around staring at the back of the house from his moped, ducking behind my car. I get the dogs and try and be quiet. I need to see what he's doing. The dogs are still growling, but at least I've not given away my location right now. I watch him for 5 minutes. No movement, just a general creepy stare in my direction. I don't think he can see me, I'm not sure. He then shuts off his moped and proceeds to crouch next to my car, where I can see him now peeking into my car windows. I don't see him trying to get in, which is weird. He's not crouching now. Obviously he feels like nobody's watching and doesn't care. He stops looking into my car and turns to the house. Creepy as hell. At this point I text Terry and tell her that Steve is doing some weird stuff and I'm getting worried. I get a text back saying call the cops if you feel unsafe. They know him. They can come talk to him. Reminding me to tell you about the time he was standing out by the tree at 6 AM when I was leaving for work, and he was still there when we came back. We think he had a psychotic breakout. How comforting is that? So, I talk myself down some. This guy is wasted. However, if he starts getting close to the door, I'm calling the cops. Dumb idea, looking back, because the cops can take such a long time to get here. I'm watching him as he makes his second round looking at my car. He then gets on his moped and drives off, and he passes the window that faces the driveway. He sped up, trying to make it so I wouldn't see him if I were watching TV. Now it's like 8 PM. The dogs are going crazy again. I look out and now the moped is parked in plain view and he's standing on the walkway just 30 feet from the house, staring and talking to himself. I previously turned off all the lights so that he can't really see in. I see him take a single step towards the door, now 30 feet away. I grab the gun. I've calmed the dogs down and they're in full protective mode. One dog to my left and one to the right. It's around 8:15 PM now and I call the cops. I explain my situation and the owners think that he had a psychotic breakdown. As I'm halfway through explaining this, I'm really scared for my safety and the operator says, "Ma'am." She then says, "I'm sorry, but you're not located in our county. I have to transfer you to this one." Are you serious? The owner said that the cops in South know him very well and how to handle him. Isn't that the guy? Yes ma'am, that is us, but you are located in a different county. This is not our jurisdiction. The guy who's bothering me lives in your county, that's why I'm calling you. And the operator transfers me to another one. When she answers the phone with the average 911, what's your emergency? I'm silent. I'm looking out the kitchen window. Steve's about 4 or 5 feet closer from before. I explain what's happening and that I was transferred because apparently I'm not in their jurisdiction. She tells me to remain calm and turn on all the lights. I said no, the guy's waiting for me to do something like that. The doors are locked. I do have a firearm. If he enters, I will shoot. She then tells me that it's safest with the lights on. I turn on the lights. He notices. He then turns around to get on his moped and goes back home. I tell her what's happened. She said, "Do I want an officer?" I say, "Hell yeah." Apparently the cops in South in this state know him, but she transferred me to you. This is the 3rd time he's come onto this property and he's getting closer to the door and I'm not safe. Calm down, ma'am. We will still send somebody, however, based on where you're located, it's gonna take a while. I say that's fine. I say if she'll stay on the line. She says that it's not really possible because she has to take other calls, but to call back if anything else happens without hesitation. Now it's about 9 PM and the sun is getting ready to set completely. Again, the dogs are going crazy. Now I'm getting real annoyed and walking around the house with a loaded gun, so if Steve sees me, he knows I have a gun. I look out the window and see his moped, but I don't see him. Where the hell is he? From the window in the kitchen, I can't see the back door. I go upstairs. One of the dogs follows and peek through the window in the bathroom. Steve is on the back porch, lighting matches, throwing them down onto the wooden porch. He doesn't seem harmless anymore. He's talking to himself and twisting his head back and forth like he's getting warmed up for a fight, or having a conversation with multiple people. I start filming from upstairs. So now, I try and hide my phone, just in case he goes up for it. The sun is down and it's getting dark. He steps onto the door and starts knocking. He starts pounding on the door. I'm pretty good at staying calm in any situation, but my heart's beating. He then stops pounding the door, quickly turns away and runs to his moped and takes off even faster than I thought he could go. Not even a minute later, I see a cop pulling into the driveway. I mentioned to the dispatcher operator that I have 2 dogs that will bark at the officer but will not attack. They are trained to be like this. I say I'm going to leave the firearm inside when I go to meet the officer. I meet the officer and the dogs don't growl, simply gave a bark, letting me know that someone's there. I went outside to meet him and told him that the guy just took off on a moped, and he says, "Oh yeah, I think I passed him." I explained that he is absolutely drunk or crazy and in his own world, and that normal people don't act this way. The cop basically shrugs off everything and says, "Well, are you gonna stay there the night?" I said no, I will leave the dogs overnight and come back in the morning. I ask him to stay while I pack up everything. I go inside, give the dogs lots of love and treats, and create what they need for the night. I take off and return the next day with my dad. My dad begins walking the perimeter to try and show him that the man is also staying here. Now, I'm a 24-year-old female. If you're wondering, then Steve, wearing the same dirty hat and outfit while holding a 24 case of Budweisers, is standing at the end of the driveway again. I'm watching him from the front window. I see my dad at the other end, and he sees him. Steve immediately turns around and goes back into the house. Now, I later learned that Steve has been to jail multiple times due to domestic abuse, and his kids can't even see him. He's very violent. No one knows how he gets money to get things. Terry and Johnny have never seen him leave for work. They've only seen him on his moped or 4-wheeler that he recently bought. I don't know who he thought I was, but every time he looked in my direction, I saw pure hatred in my eyes and evil intent. I'm really glad my dad came to stay with me, because God knows what would have happened if he didn't. I've been staffed at a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers will regularly sneak out during night to drive into town to hang out and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed towards the town. After a couple of hours of jokes, by a job blast from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads, joking around listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 AM and we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We noticed an old rusted out boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light just shining through, flickering from a fuse box right outside. The mood in the car changed in an instant. For a moment, we're all sat in silence, watching the flickering light. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something doesn't feel right. Eventually, to ease the tension that we're all feeling, we start to make a joke, jeering at one of our friends to go and turn the light off or open the door. However, suddenly, the door opens. The mood immediately changes. Nobody said anything. For the next few moments, they're a blur, but I can assure you that it was the fastest and early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever went off a road. All 5 of us are completely silent for the drive back. Something about the aura of that place felt off. To this day, I imagine sitting in the front seat of the car, and I start getting an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Who was behind that door? Why were they there at almost 4 in the morning? Why couldn't I see anybody else around, and why did it feel so off? Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old. At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with 2 friendly big dogs, one Mastiff and another German Shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog. It wasn't hunting season, and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch, and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face, and at this point, I knew I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking. As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since, and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun, and I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in SE, Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, There was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall and darkness set upon the land very early. I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realise it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stare for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house and, in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard. As he often does, I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs. At the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, he didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever, or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I'll never forget the feeling deep in my chest, both that night and the following morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent to me. It was late December in a small Texan town. We just received 5 inches of snow in the day. I can't remember what time it was. It's dark out and I'm playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 rooms, a mudroom with a door leading to our front and my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with an all old wood hardware and a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the most front-faced, with my parents being to the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt weird. It felt like somebody's watching me. I was facing the door at this point and look up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I started looking for some reason and start running. After a while, I'm sure nobody's there, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I get the feeling again. This time, I didn't look up at the door, but instead, I looked towards the window. I was just hoping that it's all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door. The doorknob's being touched. I was still, facing the door, completely frozen at the sound of the metallic doorknob. I don't know why or how, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I want to move, but I'm frozen. It was like somebody glued over every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents weren't immediately there, so I'm all on my own now. And suddenly, the door knob is being yanked with force. The door was one that had been locked with a skeleton key, so the doorknob could move freely. There's 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the doorknob was free to open. As soon as I heard the doorknob turn all the way, I sprung up the wall about 5 feet. The door fell silent. I'm glued to the wall, unable to move. The doorknob continues to slowly move. Whoever did so started trying to budge on the door, trying to pry it open, pounding on the door with their foot, kicking it. I froze until I started screaming for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked me what's wrong, and I said somebody's tried to break in. They ran inside and checked, not bothering to check outside, which I pleaded with them to do. They said it's my imagination running wild or an animal. They took one final look and said go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember going to sleep. All I remember is staring at the doorknob from my bed, never taking my eyes off of it. Suddenly, I woke up to my parents, who were obviously distressed and scared. My mum grabbed me by the shoulders, getting in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought somebody tried to break in. When I say, they listen. I was worried about how serious they were suddenly. When I thought they said it was my imagination, they took me to the front door, then to the backyard door, and pointed to the door near the driveway. You can clearly see boot prints in the snow walking along the street. Through our yard and straight to the window, then my mudroom door. This is where I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever come of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house again. I can never forget what it felt like as a child going through this and to have my parents not believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and thank God for the deadbolts.